Hi everyone. In this presentation, we're going to talk about how critical thinking is critical, pun intended, for assessment purposes. So Patrick Finn in 2011 actually put out a really great paper regarding critical thinking and communication sciences and disorders. And he talked about three prongs that are really important. The first, three prongs of skills, let's say. So the first are interpretive skills. How much information is actually understood? So when we talked about Bloom's taxonomy, we would really talk about this as the lower level of that cake, okay? And then moving right along, the next prong, right, in this three-prong process is evaluative. So in other words, now I understand the information. How much do I accept this information? So in other words, how acceptable is the argument in light of all of the evidence? Remember, we have to look at all of the evidence to determine if it's enough. Sometimes we need more evidence to make a conclusion. And then the third and final prong that Finn narrates is that of metacognitive skills. So being aware of one's own thinking. Saying to yourself, I really need to think about this critically, is a really important first step. So in all that we do, we don't even realize that we're engaging in interpretive, evaluative, and metacognitive skills. More specifically, let's ask ourselves together, when do we need to think critically as SLPs or AUDs? Let's think about diagnosis or differential diagnosis, which we'll talk a little bit more about here. Let's talk about treatment and evidence-based practice. When you're engaging with a client, how do you know that your work is effective? How do you know that you're making a change? And how do you know that that change is actually impactful? When you're counseling clients and their families, which is within the ASHA ethics and scope of practice, your approach means everything. So thinking critically about how you're engaging with someone, thinking about culture, thinking about difference, thinking about trust, thinking about empathy, those are all important elements to effective counseling. Moving right along, talking about research. How do we critically analyze research to make sure it's well done, that it's efficacious, that it's fair and equitable and just, that it's unbiased? Those are the questions that will lead us all to more critical thinking processes. What about administration and scheduling and budgeting? In other words, where are the funds for services being allocated? Is it in initiatives for equity? Is it in literacy? Is it in vocational skills? Is it in all three? And if so, which portions are apportioned to which prong? The same for scheduling. How are you scheduling your clients? Are they individual? Are they group? Are they being scheduled by mandates? And are those mandates accurate? Conversations with administration after looking at these critically would strengthen outcomes. And then my personal favorite is advocacy. One of the things that I do in private practice is work with parents to empower them as they advocate for themselves and their families. And I really do love this work because, again, it's empowering and impactful. You know, my time with families is limited, but the impact of what I teach them can really help them indefinitely. So when we're talking about advocacy, when a parent comes to me with a desire for services, I have to think critically. Is this a reasonable request? Does this child truly need services? If so, how much? And what has the past told us about this family? Meaning, has there been a history of failed requests? And if so, why? So the answer here is that we need to think critically all the time in everything that we do. I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead, but I want us to think about the language that each character uses and the accents that they use and how and if it impacts the interaction. So moving right along. If we were to write reports, let's say on Donkey, who clearly speaks with an African American English dialect, thank you, Eddie Murphy, we might look at two reports narrating the same transcript in two fundamentally different ways. So let's look on the left. Here we see child exhibits, dropping of the S in regular plurals, omitted the ED past tense, dropping of the S in possessives, substitution of f for th at the ends of words, substitution of d for th at the beginning of words. So that becomes dat. Looking at this in isolation, without understanding context, without understanding dialect, you might say, okay, this is someone who needs intervention because clearly there are some phonological and morphological markers here missing, or phonological processes, I should say. But if we look on the right, I want you to pay attention to the words used to narrate the exact same observation. Plurals are marked by the numerical word to sent. Past tense marked by intonation of context. This morning, I walked the dog. Possessive marked by owner plus thing. Owned, Susie had. The written symbol th pronounced as f in the ends of words. Bath equals bath. Notice equals, not substitutes. The written symbol for th, or I should say th, pronounced as d in the beginning of the words. Again, dat equals that. On the right, you're looking at an analysis of African American English, which is not disordered. So the bottom line here is that words matter, and how we look at a transcript and context is critical. Let's consider some other dialects. Remember, dialects are symbols with rules. They have different phonology and morphosyntax and orthography. Think about color, COLOUR, which is a British influence. Semantics, pragmatics, paralinguistics. What about differential diagnosis? Again, I have two dog. Why would I delete that plural S? Think about articulation. Because remember, AAE, African American English, is a system with rules. These are not random errors. They're not even errors. Okay, so we have to leave that at the door in terms of disorder and look at this as differential. So I linked in Moodle a website. It's International Dialects of English Archive. And I encourage you to take a few minutes to go through it. It's really, really fun. There are all different regions of the world with different speakers who've contributed the same paragraph. And you could even look in the Hispanic regions and all the different dialects, or you can compare, let's say, different classes of languages, like a Romance language versus a Slavic language, and how that impacts American English. It's a lot of fun. Go check it out. So then I ask you to think on this. Is there such a thing as mainstream American English? Alternatively, is MAE a dialect? And finally, as clinicians, what is our role for African American English speaking kids in our schools? For more on this, there are forums available through ASHA. So this is language, speech, hearing in the schools. Wedding in 2018 put out an article toward accurate identification of developmental language disability within linguistically diverse schools. All right, here I'm encouraging you to think critically about African American English. But there are also speakers of African American English who do have disorders. So we need to be able to differentially diagnose within these diverse scenarios. And then Mills in 2021 actually put out an article about serving African American speakers in schools. Both of these articles have been linked to Moodle for you.